In regards to whether the current playoff system should be changed, outgoing Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaneys told ESPN's Adam Rittenberg, quote, "The thing that would probably trip it is if the committee left out a champion from the ACC or SEC. That would be an immediate catapult forward, as it was when Auburn was left out." This is interesting here, Greeny, because I think what we saw this year proves that they won't have to expand anytime soon. They'll point to this year. They'll say, we had all these conference championships that basically were expansion in the playoff. They were playing games in the playoff.
Well, to be clear, what he's talking about is that famous year in the early 2000s where there were 3 unbeatens. One of them was Auburn, and Auburn wound up getting left out of the party, and the SEC got upset about it. That's back when they just had the BCS, so there were only 2 teams that made it. The suggestion he has there, and Jim Delaneys has been for a long time one of the most powerful people in collegiate athletics, is that if the SEC or the ACC were to be left out, the outcry would be louder than it is in the case of the Big Ten. Do you think that's accurate?
He's right about the SEC. He's incorrect with the ACC. Now, I think it's an oxymoronic statement to think that the SEC would get left out because those two things naturally, they juxtapose each other. The SEC will forever be included. But he is right. The SEC, and everybody knows, they move the needle of college football. They have, to a degree, deserved that right because of what Alabama did for so long. But the ACC, no, Clemson's the only thing, Greeny, that's holding that conference together.
Yeah, they've made it every year because in the early days of this format, Jimbo was still at Florida State and Jameis was there, and they made it. Now it's been this run with Clemson. So let's then talk about the second piece of this, because he's suggesting it might expand if that were necessary. There are some programs that just have a lot of significance. I've said many times, if Notre Dame were unbeaten and got left out, they would change the system. He's talking about the SEC and the ACC. But where do you stand? Because you and I have had this conversation on the notion of expansion in general. You cover the sport for a living. Do you believe they'd be better off going to 8 teams?
I don't right now, because I think there's something special about it being the 4 best teams and every single game mattering starting from the beginning of the college football season. From the very start, you know, and we point back to that Auburn-Oregon game, for instance, that was a decider in the college football playoff. It makes every week matter. And I think the committee is going to be, and the college football playoff in general, Bill Hancock has said this, Greeny, they don't want to expand because they look at it and they say this is what makes our tournament, our whole thing, different from anything else.
Greeny, you spent so long trying to convince me of so many things in this life. Oh, that Michigan will beat Ohio State. Get the heck out of here. But for once, Greeny, you've convinced me of this one. The college football playoff should not expand, and there's no reason why. I watched the championship games this past weekend. Baylor versus Oklahoma, that was essentially a playoff game. Utah versus Oregon, that was a playoff game for Utah. Georgia versus LSU, that was a playoff game for Georgia. So finally, Greeny, I'll give it to you, my friend. You've convinced me.
Well, yeah, in this particular case, and no one year is the perfect reason to make a decision, but the championship games of the SEC, the Big 12, and the Big 10 would have been essentially meaningless. Both teams playing in it would have made it if you just look at the way the final 8 wind up. But to me, I'm glad that we brought that piece of it up. The beauty of college football, what makes it what it is that the playoffs begin in August. Every game is a playoff game, starting at the very beginning. Do you know what I think could trip it up? It's all these players skipping these bowl games. I think that the fact that we now have 3 games in the playoff that means so much, and all these players are skipping all these other bowls. Georgia's playing in the Sugar Bowl. That's supposed to matter a lot.
Think about
their whole team isn't playing.
Think about this for a second, and Greeny, you brought up a point that'll be more and more pivotal. The Sugar Bowl is a huge game. The get-in right now for that I saw yesterday was like $6 on a website.
Crazy.
In the Sugar Bowl, because of the playoffs, it has made 2 games extremely meaningful, and all the other games seem a little less meaningful.
That's the point. If these bowl games, which have been an extraordinarily important and politically significant part of the sport for a long time, feel a real diminution of their power and, more significantly, of money, I think that, more than anything, could be a reason they would look to expand it so you could add more of it. Am I being told we have Acho in a bowl game? There's nothing I love more than watching our analysts play. Yes. This was Emmanuel Acho. Come on, Ach, tell me about this one.
Oh, this is the Holiday Bowl, baby. Woo! Now, look, Greeny, this is a surprise to me, but I can always talk about myself. We went 8-5 that year. We're in Cali, San Diego. I should have had that pick. I know, Neek. I know I should have had it, but we took home the dub. I didn't win Defensive MVP for some reason. I'm still mad about it. Don't get me started.
We're so glad you're watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports and analysis, download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, make sure you subscribe to ESPN Plus. We'll see you there.